So my name is Jeannie Welliver. I've worked for the City of Richmond for 33 years. I've worked on Main Street Station, the mosque, police headquarters, a lot of preservation restoration projects. I was behind the scenes helping the city with tires when they took the monuments, the monuments down, the bronze statues. And then I was asked to lead the project for the city side of things as the project manager to assist in the removal and archiving of the pedestals and how they should be laid out so they could be easily numbered, easily cataloged. Of course, they're in the field. When I got the project, I asked Simon's contractor, we paid him to build me a roadbed. Hopefully we wouldn't have had all of these weeds. That wasn't the intention, but weeds found their way through the crushed stone. So they're on a roadbed. They shouldn't be sinking. Some of them are very heavy. They're on plastic pallets, but their weight is such that they'll crush. The reason Lee's has 2 pallets is the state put them on wooden pallets. We put them on top of plastic, but this is the Lee monument. So I have served as an architect for the City of Richmond. And I do vertical construction and land development for the city. Well, I'm from Richmond, and I volunteered to be the Slave Trails project manager for all projects that needed to be built, formed, markers, artwork, brochures, because in 2000-ish, I grew up here, went to the best Civil War teacher in the state of Virginia, Mrs. Meadows, went to Douglas Southall Freeman High School. Our flag was the Confederate flag, and our song was Dixie, and I was a cheerleader. Our band was in Confederate uniforms. How we were taught about the Civil War was pretty much everybody was taught similarly. We had to go to the battlefields and prove we were there with cameras back in the day. I mean, had real cameras. And it wasn't until about 2000 when I was asked, because I did Main Street Station, that Lumpkin's jail fell on that property, but we didn't know if it was underground in archaeological intact format. His grounds, nasty slave trader. Well, I studied everything, history in Richmond, and in my senior and junior year, they asked me to read the big English lit book, and I said, I'm not. I'd like to go do the history of Richmond. So very telling. I took pictures of Main Street Station, the farmer's market, which I ended up working on. It's kind of telling now when I look back. I was right there. So I went down to Shako Slip in the 2000s with this Lumpkin's jail in my inbox, and I met with Jenny Dotz, Chris Stevenson, Jeffrey Ruggles, all historians. They spoke of this man, Mr. Lumpkins, who traded people. They talked about the number of auction houses, and we also spoke of the higher gross receipt tax people trading than flour. And Gallego Mills is where the James Center sits today. We are one of the largest flour trader cities in the world, and we are trading people and selling people at a higher gross receipt tax. I didn't know any of this. That wasn't in my history books. It wasn't written anywhere. Any Civil War battlefield, you couldn't find the history. I felt lied to, sick, tearful. So I called the Slave Trail Commission because we had been back and forth talking about the path, the slave trail. And I said, well, I'm coming to your next meeting. And they didn't have a construction project manager, excuse me, or anyone from the architecture design world. I said, I'm volunteering today to be your project manager. And which is kind of funny if you're from here. I was like, well, what did y'all think when I roll in and say, I'm going to be your proud old white girl from the West End? And they're like, oh. And then they're like, oh my God, get out of her way. She's going to help us. So I volunteered to serve as their project manager I served as that for 17 years. I went from economic development back to public works. They kept it for a minute. Now it's back under me as the project manager for the Shako project. The Winfrey Cottage, the Reconciliation Statue needs a few improvements. The National Slavery Museum, the Shako Institute, Marlon Buckner's working on. All of these projects that tell the story of enslavement and post and prior. We just had a meeting on the Shako project. That's where I came directly from. Weirdly enough, the year of the sesquicentennial, our sesquicentennial 400th, I was the slave trail project manager and the Civil War sesquicentennial person for the city. And one day I had to do a groundbreaking at Lumpkins Jail and an unveiling of a Civil War battlefield marker on the same day within the same 3 hours. It was been weird. You can see this is Robert E. Lee's pedestal stones. There is a jigsaw puzzle that's all numbered, and every stone has an aluminum tag on the non-public facing side. So if this ever wanted to be placed back together, placed somewhere, we can do that. We have a road map and a jigsaw puzzle. Robert E. Lee's is probably the more decorative, fascinating from a public art reaction piece. You can still see the graffiti and read some of the words. Some are still intact because they were on one stone set. This is the original stone. Stones are usually honed for the public facing side and then cut, rough cut. So you can see this is granite. Yep. There are few craftsmen that can perform this work left on the planet. It's a lost art.
Right, so this is finished.
That's the public facing side. And then the tags were always placed on the non-public facing side. And so every one of them has a tag. So you can see the Marcus Davis Peters is still intact. There are 1,600 about stones in this entire field, representing all of the monuments that were taken down, including some small monuments that were at like VCU and the Wickham Monument. Jeff Davis had the most pieces and parts to that monument, and we'll go up and see that soon. The mile marker, so this is AP Hill, as you can tell. AP Hill was actually buried in the mound under the base of the monument, and we actually had a funeral company handle his remains and moving them properly in a hearse to his new resting place in Culpeper, Virginia. Maury was a writer of the seas as well. So on Maury's monument, you see a lot of details that come from sea creatures and sea life. And then you can see Maury's name in the back. So this is the Maury pedestal storage area. And some more fish. Yeah, they etch into the granite. And here's some more fish on the side. Jeb Stewart's. Bird details. And then as Pathfinder of the Sea. And again, these bolts are here because that's the way they lifted them up to put them on the flatbed. So a crane would lift up this huge piece and place it on the flatbed. As you can see, we also stored all of the railings. The only thing missing from Jeb Stewart's, they actually had Civil War swords on the railings around the traffic circle, and those have been long gone and taken, but they were actually from the Civil War. We pulled the stones for Robert E. Lee because they used to be owned by the state of Virginia from a storage area in the state women's penitentiary in Goochland, and we went out about 9 at night to take Robert E. Lee from Goochland down Route 5 to bring him into the city of Richmond by police escort, and you wouldn't have been able to find where they had stored him. It was like a graveyard, like you said. So Jefferson Davis was probably the most elaborate of all of the monuments as far as the pieces and parts of the stones. And we'll get over to the column, the main column, and you can still read. So here we are in the Jeff Davis area, President Jefferson Davis. We did take the state medallions that I didn't want to walk away, and they're in storage elsewhere. This was a very elaborate monument with many, many columns and the most number of pieces of stone that formed this monument.
Wasn't there like a statue
yes.
at the top?
Yes, she's laying down over there in storage, yes.
Right.
Invictus, I believe it's... And I'll show you soon the one that took the company the most time to set up its removal, and you'll see why when we get there. It's the Soldiers and Sailors Monument.
That's the one that was in Churchill, right?
Yes, it was in Churchill. I'm sorry?
Because the one had like a tall column as well.
Yes, very, very tall column. And I am looking for it now that it's so overgrown. We'll find it. You probably passed it. This area is VDOT staging for bridge work. And these are our pallets that we have extras for the project. That to me looks like, here it is. Yeah, that's it. These pieces created a column for the soldiers and sailors, but this was the trickiest piece of all to remove. They had staged this piece about 7 to 8 hours. They strapped it at its top, which is now its bottom, and they put straps around this eucalyptus leaf motif and lifted it up in the air and brought it over down to the flatbed. It was the heaviest one piece of all, and that was the top capital of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, and these are the pieces of that column. That was on a Saturday. We all took a break, went down and went to Millie's, went back. They were still scratching their heads, but they did a great job removing these. There were people all over the world that worked on this team of men handling the stones. And then the man that cut General Lee off of his horse, Billy, is from the Northeast, and he is one of the most well-renowned monument people in the world. And he lives in the Northeast. So Team Henry locally hired a magnificent group of subcontractors to assist with taking down the monuments and taking down the pedestals. So it's kind of daunting to come out here, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, every time someone comes out for the first time, they just can't imagine. I'm proud of the city and the Black History Museum and contractors. We all worked very well together. They are in keeping for whatever their next future may be. And we have a protected site here at the wastewater treatment plant. One of the reasons they came here was not a slam to what they were. It was because we have security protecting our wastewater treatment plant. We used to store chlorine on this site. And if you blow up a chlorine tank, it can kill the region.
Yeah.
So this is our most protected site, and we knew that we had to have a lot of room to properly store and catalog the pedestals and the monuments. Mm-hmm. The monuments, again, are shrink wrapped just to protect them. The shrink wrap the UV rays will eventually tear, but that's why they're covered and just protected until such time they have a different home. Jefferson Davis is on loan to the Valentine Museum. He's not on site. And as we said, the large monument on the back of the flatbed is General Robert E. Lee, and he's in two pieces because they had to make sure that he could go down the street. He was assembled in multiple pieces. So statues that large are assembled in sections, and then they're welded together, and that welded joint is stronger than any other part of the monument itself. Paul DePasquale, local Richmonder, who did the Arthur Ashe Monument on Monument Avenue, and also King Neptune down in Virginia Beach, Oliver Hill, many, many others, the oarsmen down by our canal walk. He was a consultant on this as well, to guide in how these monuments were sitting and set on the pedestals. They were set by pins, and cutting that pin and then lifting off the monument. He was there every step of the way so that the city would have a high level of expertise to handle these. And you got the pictures of all the others in shrink wrap. A local boat company came out and shrink wrapped these for us, and we paid them to do it. But I said, "Is this one of the most unique things you've ever shrink wrapped?" He said, "Yes, absolutely." The Modern Museum of Art for LA came out and did a documentary film, and I'm not sure if it's been produced quite yet, as they walked and talked, and they covered the country of, which pieces of which cities were impacted by removals. But this one is a fairly important piece that came from the Robert E. Lee pedestal. And I'll make sure I get to you, if they're not already in your file, my personal photos before the weeds came. The city intended to build a roadbed about 6 inches, but weeds do eventually make their way through, as everybody knows at their own home. Mm-hmm. So we didn't intend for the optic to look quite like this, but we can kill these weeds at such time. If you're driving down the interstate and you're going to the Maury exit, when it's winter and there's no foliage or lesser, you can see these as you're driving by if you know where they are. And from here you can see a lot of those tags, where they're all tagged on the non-public facing side of the portion of the pedestal. Each stone has these aluminum tags with a number on it that align with a matrix for each former monument that Team Henry and I worked together to just make sure they were cataloged well, and the library should have all of those jigsaw puzzles, for no better term, how to put these back together if that were to ever happen somewhere, someplace. Yeah, so the contractor decided how the method would be. So the contractor came out and The crane operator, the monument specialist, they decided how they were going to address it. Typically, like soldiers and sailors, they removed the railing so they could get equipment near it. Soldiers and sailors' monument had already been removed in the summer prior. Lifting that eucalyptus column capital, big column, that's the capital. They strapped the eucalyptus leaves to grab it. There was nothing really to grab, and that was the heaviest one. And they tested it, lifted it, lowered it, lifted it, lowered it. And it took about 6 to 8 hours for them to just make sure they were ready to go. And then they put it on the back of a flatbed. Then they'd bolt into the next one. If they couldn't grab it, like eucalyptus leaves, they'd bolt into it and lift it with bolts and move it to the flatbed until it was down. And then when that flatbed was full, it would come here. They'd start placing them in these sections, and they'd fill up another flatbed and go from there. The one that took the longest again was the Jeff Davis, because it had so many pieces and parts. Robert E. Lee took a while as well. The most emotional was the A.P. Hill monument. The Valentine assisted us, and we knew he had been moved a number of times, but placed in a box with a white lining. That's what the paper had said. We didn't know if it was lead-based or if that wooden box would deteriorate, which it did do. There were stories that A.P. Hill was buried standing up. That is false. There wasn't much of the remains of A.P. Hill by the time he was moved a number of times, and what remained was somewhat well documented. We didn't know what to expect. So A.P. Hill's statue and the pedestal was removed, and then there was a base. And we probably expected under the granite on the mound, the hill of grass and dirt, he was likely there, which he was. So once the final piece of stone was removed, and we knew it wasn't hollow, we knew we'd find A.P.'s burial there. He was buried there before the monument, so 2020 would have gone, oh, he's in the hill. But it wasn't that well documented, and we wanted to be super careful. Mr. Hill had a descendant there, John Hill. He was a descendant of A.P. Hill and also Robert E. Lee, and he looked very much like Robert E. Lee, but a younger version. He was there to direct how that funeral for the family should be handled with the funeral home. When the pedestal came off, the crane had gone to go to the next project, and there were 3 boulder stones that weren't sealed waterproof, watertight, that were laying kind of diagonally like this, huge stones. The backhoe operator probably could have pulled them off, because they're very great. They can pet your cat with that backhoe, and if they're good, your cat will feel like it's people. It's not that we didn't have faith in them. I wanted to bring the crane back. So they bolted into each of the 3 pieces of stone and raised it so they wouldn't fall. If they were to fall, it would have crushed what was beneath in the tomb. So they pulled the 3 off, and before I called all of the cameras away, I saw what remained, and his skull was in the tomb. So I'd asked everyone, cameras down, nobody. So Mr. Hill, and he allowed the funeral director to video for the family. They went down into the tomb. It was a perfect rectilinear cut tomb, and the box that he was buried in had disintegrated. So what they put in the body bag was the disintegrated box. There was a piece of uniform and a button, metal. There was a femur bone, and his skull was there. It appeared to me that they laid him west, head, east, and he was laid as if that was a full skeleton. The skull was in the place that it should be, and the femur bone was in the place that it should be. This is the first time anyone's telling this. I think Paul De Pasquale may have said something to the media, but we wanted to not.
For the sake of the
family, next day.
Yeah.
So this is for history records for and only for that, but we made everyone put their cameras down. The day of AP Hill, there were 2 drones that we were hoping would leave. I think they ran out of battery by the time, so there were no drones, and nobody came near until AP Hill's remains placed in a body bag on a gurney, on wheels. They put a flag over him, which was actually like a blanket from the family, and then he went off, and reporters came in and took pictures of the empty tomb. So that we did allow. But during the funeral, no. And it was Mayor Stoney and the city administration that wanted that funeral respectfully done and for the family. So every move I made, because I was the project manager of it with the contractor, I represent the City of Richmond, and I called the crane back. I said, no, I don't want a backhoe operator trying to pull that stone back, because if it had slipped and fallen, it would have crushed AP Hill's remains. So then I asked John Hill if it's okay to bolt, pick up, and move. And he agreed with every decision that we made, and we referred to him for every decision. And I think we did well by the family. As far as the process of their removal, I don't have an opinion on it, because that's a behind-the-scenes, very tense, very stressful time. And I don't have an opinion on it because I just can't pretend to be in the leadership roles of any of those folks. But I will say, for the Slave Trail Commission, and myself included, listening, they taught me a lot. We should have had a conversation a long time before Mr. Floyd's horrible death. And we didn't. And if you're not going to express truths about Civil War, and we're only telling this story, then it's unbalanced. And it hurts people. If you don't recognize people and their life history and their life stories and their culture that was ripped from them for all the slave trade reasons, then it hasn't healed. And there's a lot more healing left to do. So my opinion of them as pieces of art, they're beautiful pieces of art. Even this craftsmanship of the stone. So as pieces of art, what is their next role and interpretation? That's not for me to decide. But I do wish we had had a meaningful conversation of truth and storytelling. One thing that happened when we did the slave trail markers way before this project, black men in their 60s, called their friends who had moved from Richmond, weeping, saying they're finally telling the stories. So those are the things I take and am grateful that I got to play a role in those things. This is this, but the slave trail and the stories of just the truth of what happened here is more important to me than this. I wanted to take them and place them respectfully for those that wanted that to be respectful. I think we did that. They are removed. They're waiting for their next story or future. So I hope I answered your question, but I can't profess to be the mayor on those tough days, or the governor, or any of the other leadership. So, I saw the tough decisions in their face and the fear, and it was tough times, but thanks for coming out.